So we are live. Everybody, welcome back to another episode of the IndieVerse, episode 15. For those who it may be your first time on the IndieVerse, on this kind of podcast type thing that we do, we talk about all about indie writing, self-publishing writing, and anything in that kind of sphere, whether it be audiobooks, covers, etc. So thank you so much for joining us today. And today I've got Justin here to chat with us a little bit about his books and also his experience with writing craft. So Justin, I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to be here. Like Kaylin said, my name is Justin Fike. I am an indie fantasy author. My current series that I'm working on right now is called The Far Shore Chronicles, which is very much like an action adventure fantasy, kind of action adventure slash epic fantasy. But I love everything about fantasy and sci-fi, honestly, as a reader. I've been self-publishing for, let's see, 2 years now. But I have been studying writing for coming close to 20 at this point, if you count when I really first had that I really love this and I want to learn more about it moment. So that has kind of been a lifelong adventure for me.
That's amazing. And fantasy, epic fantasy, action adventure sounds like right up my alley because that's what I write too. So I'm very excited for this discussion. But 20 years, wow, that is a long time. So I guess the first thing I want to ask is take us back to the beginning. What was the point where you were like, wow, this is the thing that I want to do for 20 years?
Sure. Well, so probably 2 points.
Mm-hmm.
Because I say 20 years because in high school, I actually set out to write a book. I actually had a dream, and I woke up with it from this very vivid dream, and I remembered all the details and the characters and this storyline, and it was so cool. And I'd grown up as an obsessive reader. I cleaned out our library every couple of months, and the librarian was always having to call my mom and he tried to check this out. Are you sure you want him to have this book? This is for grown-ups or whatever. And she's like, yes, just give him the books. Um, so something about it was some kind of a trigger for me, I guess. I don't know. It was this was my story and I wanted to tell it. And then I tried and I realized I was terrible at writing because nobody is naturally good at writing. You can be a great storyteller, but writing is a kind of a different thing. So the gap between the concept that I had and how cool I thought it was and my sadly lacking ability to actually execute on it in any kind of coherent or effective way was frustrating, but also kind of appealing. It was something wait a minute, what's going on here? There's something about this that. So I started reading books about writing craft just for fun because I found then it was my eyes kind of got open to so all of these books that I love and all these authors that I love, they're doing something here. I somehow it flipped and I started to see books more from the authorial side rather than just the reader consumer side. I got really interested in that. So then when I was in college, every semester I had a creative writing seminar, but it was it's just a thing that I did for me. I did it. It was here's my normal course load. My undergraduate degree was in medieval history, shooting for effective, lifelong, career-based skill sets there. But I loved it. That's what I enjoyed. And then I had my economics course load and all these other things. But then it was but every semester I'm going to have my creative writing seminar for me, not because oh, someday I'm going to publish books. And remember, this was back in I started college I graduated college in 2007, so 2004 to 7. So this was way before Kindle, way before indie publishing wasn't a thing. There was
Mm-hmm.
real publishing and then maybe vanity press stuff, but
Yeah.
it wasn't a real thing. So my concept of what it looked like to be an author was very it was an unattainable thing that really cool, talented, special people got to do, and it wasn't on my radar. But I loved writing, so I did writing seminars. I was always writing. It was my outlet.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I remember about 6 months or so after I graduated, I was kind of going through the classic okay, so my security bubble of everything making sense is sort of popped, and now I have no idea what I'm really doing with my life. And the thing I thought I was going to go on to grad school, and then that kind of fell through for a variety of reasons, and I was in that in between. And I remember having a conversation with my mom in the car. We were driving somewhere, and because she's my mom and she's great, she was asking me about the book that I was working on because I was always working on something, even though I never finished anything. She was being, supportive. And I was telling her about the story and all these different things, and she stopped me. She was like, I just don't understand why you won't just admit that this is what you want to do. Like, I never see you come alive. I never see your eyes light up the way they do when you're talking about a story. You don't get that way about anything else. So, like, why not this? And there was something about just the way she asked the question and how, like, it was like, I don't know. I don't know why. I can't even answer that question. I don't have a good answer to that question.
Gotta love when moms
I
hit you with
mean,
that knowledge,
right? She
eh?
nailed me.
Like,
It was perfect. It was exactly what I
yeah.
needed to hear. Um, and so, yes, I think so. That would have been, I guess, in about 2008, I suppose. Um, and that was a real turning point for me, just in the sense of like, okay, I need to take this more seriously and sort of own this as something that's not just this like private thing that I do that I don't tell anybody about. I don't really work on it. I'm not really committing to it. It's just like this hobby, which is fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with having writing be a hobby. I think it's a really healthy hobby. But naming it for me as something that I wanted as more like a consistent part of my life. Um, but I didn't really know where to go from there, and I kind of had to cobble together a lot of my own sort of learning and development of my writing craft and just all these different things through a lot of trial and error. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I started a business like self-employed at that point doing digital content development for people because I basically figured out that like if you're reasonably competent in 2008 and 9 when there's no real jobs, like the people who have money will hire you to do tech stuff for them and like help them with internet things. So I kind of just winged it and did a lot of faking it until I made it and was doing so I did that for a while and was really focused on those things. And then through a whole weird series of events that I won't even go into the details, ended up having a family friend of my dad's who was the author in residence at St. John's College in Oxford. And so we just got to talking one time when he was around, and I don't even know to this day, I don't know why he tuned into or what I said that made him tune into the fact that I was like a closet aspiring author. But he was really nice about it and like asked me a lot of questions. And then for some reason, without even asking to read any of my stuff, he was like, well, let me put you in touch with, Claire, who, Dr. Morgan, who's the director of Oxford's fairly recent creative writing master's program. She's a great lady. Like, I'm sure she'll love you. Let me put you in touch with her and tell her she should read your stuff. It was like ridiculous, completely unwarranted. And then,
And you're like, this is great. I love it.
Well, I didn't even
Yeah.
like, there was a little bit of, it was a very like, this happened in the space of like maybe an hour long conversation. It was very strange.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I think part of what was like, I think in hindsight, I think my dad had talked to him a bit about my writing journey and stuff, and he had a little more context than I realized at the time. But he put me in touch with their program, and I found out more about the Oxford MST, and decided to apply. Went through the application process, and in the window of the application process, actually got married. My wife and I were living abroad then in Mexico. Later on in that year, when I heard back from them after I thought it had not happened and I didn't get in, and then it was like they were like, "No, actually, you're in, and we need you here in 2 weeks for the start
See
of
you
term."
soon. Yeah.
Which thankfully it was a part-time program, so we would
Nice.
go and study there for like 2 weeks at a time, and then we would do 2 weeks on site and then 3 months of our own time to work on our
Yeah.
project. So it wasn't like move for 2 years, but it was a big commitment, and I almost backed out. Like, I almost said no because it was just all like it came real fast, and it was super scary, and it was this whole
Yeah.
thing. And my wife was like, "You're an idiot. You've been wanting to do this for years. You're going, and we're gonna make it work." So did that, and that was, I think, probably when things really gelled for me and locked in of like, oh, not only do I want to do this, but I can do this. And coming out of that program then 2 years later was when I really kind of got over my circular, like, I'm going to start the same book over and over and over again because I don't feel like it's good enough kind of loop. And then about a year and a half after I graduated, I finished my first book and then published it half a year after that.
That is just such an amazing story. And there are so many like pivotal points of that. I just think back to like the part about your mom and
Yeah.
like sometimes moms are just so good for like,
Isn't that just the truth?
yeah, the wisdom that they bring. Oh my goodness. Um, but Oxford, wow. So Oxford was my dream when I was in high school. like actually, and my parents were like, maybe do your undergrad in Canada and then think about going abroad. And I was
Sure.
like, I guess that's fair.
Okay,
That's a
that's kind of
reasonable, like,
reasonable.
yeah. So they're like, maybe like a drive, not like a multi-hour plane ride. And I was
Not
like,
not an ocean.
yeah. And so I was like, oh, I guess
Fair enough.
fine.
Yeah.
So I have always like I said, my dream. So I guess I'm really curious to hear, especially because it was like on site, off site, and I have done a
Mm-hmm.
creative writing program that was primarily off site through a college. So I'm really interested to hear about your experiences there. Like, if you had to, I guess this is like a little adaptation of the question that I sent you, but if you had to like say Rose, like your favorite thing about it,
Mm-hmm.
and Thorn, your least favorite thing about it, or like the
Sure.
thing that would be improved the most, what would it be?
Oh, I had a lot of favorite things. It
Okay, you
genuinely
can
was
do more than one
amazing. I'll
favorite
do a
thing.
couple because so
Yeah.
first off, Oxford legitimately is like magical.
Yeah.
It is a completely unique city. You feel like the architecture is entirely medieval. Like it's Hogwarts. Like it genuinely is. They actually filmed a lot of Harry Potter scenes in Hogwarts, like hallways and stuff. I mean, I'm sorry, in Oxford hallways and things. So that was amazing, and just the feeling of being connected to history. There are not very many places in the world that are entirely dedicated to learning.
Hmm.
And you feel it, or I did when I was there. Like you, just the connection to that space and that way of being was really cool. I just felt like a treat every time that I got off the bus from London and got there. And I always came in a day early for term and just walked around. And we were broke as anything, so I stayed in like the cheapest hostel we could find. But I would like just spend a whole day just walking around and just smelling everything and seeing everything, and it was fantastic. Um, the other one of my I think honestly my other thing even more, I mean, the professors were fantastic, and I mean if any of them are listening to this, hey, thank you so much, you guys were all amazing. But even more than the professors, it was actually the other students. So it was a
Hmm.
fairly obviously it was a fairly small group. I think there were about 12 of us, 12 or 15 ish. And some Europeans, some Americans, some like East Asians, like international cast. And the other thing, one of the things that's really cool about the program, so it's a master's in creative writing, but it spans all creative writing disciplines. So
Hmm.
some of us were fiction and prose authors. There were poets.
Poetry, yep.
There were screenwriters, aspiring film writers, like the whole
Very
gamut.
interesting. Yeah, my
Um,
program was just like prose and poetry, but very
right.
interesting. Yeah.
So that was really interesting because then all of our conversations were all and so you always beginning at the beginning of each term, but you would read everybody's submissions, and we all marked up and turned in each other's stuff. So every time I had something, I had like 15 really smart people giving
Hmm.
me notes back on it, and then we would have discussion. Was like a major part of each term was just like everybody would get like a couple of hours of workshopping on their individual thing from the whole group, which was awesome. And then you would have classes and instruction from famous poets and whatever on their particular discipline. And I think actually that was one of the things that like I learned so much more from studying poetry. And like I wrote a radio drama, I wrote a screenplay, I wrote a poetry collection, which I had always dabbled in poetry before, but like actually in a fairly
Hmm.
rigorous, like well informed way. I'd never done that. And all of those elements of writing, it's like I took something from each of those things and brought it back to my prose writing. It's not that I didn't learn a lot about prose fiction from the classes, but I definitely didn't learn because that was already something I had been working on. So I didn't learn nearly as much as I did from the cross disciplinary approach. And from the interaction with such a really interesting range of people with really different aesthetics, really different perspectives, really different preferences. And so having people there were some people in the class who'd never read fantasy before, and I came in being like, hey, I know that this is not normally cool, and like everyone in academics says that literary fiction is the only legitimate thing, but I love speculative fiction and I'm going to be writing fantasy, and if anyone doesn't like that, we can talk about it. And so we had some really, really interesting conversations about sort of elevating the genre and getting their notes back of like, okay, so this was weird, but I loved this, and like this really
Hmm.
connected with me and surprised me, and that whole range was just really, really instructive, and and fun, frankly. Like they were just there. I mean, I'm still really good friends with a lot of them. They're all just amazing people out there, doing amazing things. So that was definitely, those elements were some of the highest points of the experience overall.
That's amazing. Oh, it sounds
Yeah,
like a dream. And
it pretty much was.
anything you would like maybe change?
Mm, I didn't. I really wished that we had been able to be there full time. I would have loved
Yeah.
that element to it. Coming home, like, so I would fly over by myself, do 2 weeks on site, and then fly home, and then have 3 months where you have your term list and your assignments and everything that you're working on. It was nice that they gave you like a longer window, so you weren't on that like the American system tends to give you more shorter assignments, and this
Hmm.
was like 3 months, sink or swim. You get 1 grade, for your term. Like, don't blow it, and let us know, I guess, if you get in trouble or something. But like, don't get in trouble was kind of the like get it done kind of ethos, which I loved.
Send
I
us an
could see how
email
that
if
would
you have
be,
questions, but don't.
but don't
Like,
have questions. Like, just be a grown up,
yeah.
and get your work done. So like that was good, but then it was the challenge of like integrating. I mean, on the one hand, it taught me a lot because I had to figure out how to write
Right.
consistently and with some element of quality in the middle of normal life, and that was actually very valuable learning curve. But experientially, I really wished that we could have been there full time for at least like maybe one term or something like that, and actually lived in the city and
Hmm.
done that. Honestly, there's not too much else. Oh, here's one thing. There, because it was an academic program, and I think this is very true of almost all academic programs, the focus was so heavily on craft and execution that
Right.
there was very, very little discussion given to the mechanics of being an author, which is different than the mechanics of writing something. And in other words, like
Yep.
all of the factors and things that you have to consider about, like, how do you cultivate a writing lifestyle that will allow you to consistently produce work of quality, like dealing with public. I mean, they actually did a really cool job of, like, they would do these evening seminars where they would bring in publishers. Like, we heard from someone who worked for Amazon. They had a pretty heavy bias against like new media type stuff because
Hmm.
Oxford, but still, like, they tried to be reasonable about it. Um, but just not a lot of thought or discussion around what does it take to actually become and then be a publishing author, not just to write well. And I think that's a real shortcoming, because you have a lot of people who are equipped to write really well, and hopefully they do, but probably as soon as they graduate, like a lot of my friends, like, took years and years and years before they finished anything, because all of a sudden it's like,
Right.
now it's easy to become dependent on the external structure of an academic program,
Yep.
and then as soon as it's gone, you're like, well, I get a job again and stuff.
Hmm.
And so I would have really liked more practical support and input on kind of the living rhythms, especially for most, like, almost every author is going to go through some state. Like, you have to write before you can be published. So even if you're super fortunate and you get published on your first book, you still have to get that first book done without having it be what you do professionally. So
Right.
how do you bridge that transition? How do you make space for writing in your life and in your mind and in your daily rhythms and all that other stuff? And then what are some of the mechanics of just a better window into the publishing world, and some of those
Hmm.
details I think would have been, I think, really helpful and really, really practical in terms of launching people into more of a career of doing something with their work.
Right.
But I mean, at the end, at some point, you have to cut something. Like, there's only so much you can do. So I think they probably tried to do the best they could with
Hmm.
with the time we had. But if I could change something, that's probably what I would change, is to bring in more of a focus on that.
I think that's a really super interesting answer for two reasons. One, because all of academia seems to be like that. Like, it equips you to know the content very
Yes.
well, and the subject, not the content, the subject matter, like the topic, the subject.
Mm-hmm.
I studied, for example, in my undergrad environmental science, and I knew, you want me to calculate like
Right.
some thermodynamics equation? Sure. But like, when it comes to what does this
What does that
actually mean for a
mean?
career, and like, how
Mm-hmm.
does this apply? Like, that was not there.
Yes.
So I think that's very like a valid criticism that kind of runs across academia as a whole. And the second piece that I found super interesting was, when you spoke about the transition between like writing your first book and getting that first publishing deal, or self-publishing your first book. I feel like authors are in a very unique position, and it's not a good unique position, but it's a unique position where authors actually have to do all of the work before they get paid.
Right.
Like I go to my day job and I work and then I get paid for that work like pretty immediately, but you can spend as an author months on a project just to not be paid for any of that work. So I think that's very
more,
unique.
I mean, these days it's even harder. If you get a publishing contract, your advance is not going to be as high as it was 20 years ago.
Yep.
If you want to do indie, you got to have
editors, covers,
books, 4 books before you can plan. Like even if you're doing well, just the economics of indie publishing don't work on 1 or 2 titles. Generally, not like sustainably speaking. And I think even more than the economic side of it, there is something, it's like the thing you're doing isn't really considered legitimate until you've finished it. And sometimes finishing it can take a long time. I mean, I was very fortunate. Like I know I'm partly speaking on behalf of a lot of friends of mine who really wrestle with this, where their family is like, but you haven't written anything, so it's just a hobby. But like it's that awkward trend, and like it's very, very difficult to break through until you break through, and then everyone wants to talk to you. But what do you do before
very
then?
True.
Is a challenge. So
and like you said, just that, like, I mean, I've not experienced it personally, but I do know friends who have experienced it where like people don't take it seriously as a potential as a career, because at that point it's not generating income or not generating a full-time income. It's like, oh, well, it's still a side thing. I think, I don't know, writing's in a super unique space. And it's interesting that we kind of just, I mean, it's the whole industry and how it's structured as a whole, but it is interesting that as authors, we kind of are just okay with, when we have to query, it has to be a full manuscript. Like, to me, I feel like if I go and hire an editor, they provide me a sample edit and I can see their testimonials and previous work. Like, why does that not extend to the author,
So it's a challenging catch-22, right? Because
it's such a challenging catch-22.
We've all read books that were fine until they weren't. Like,
yep.
You know what I mean?
We've all also started projects and potentially not finished them. So like, let's say you pitch something that's not done. A publisher could be like, oh my God, this is amazing, sign it. And then realistically, the chance of it being completed might not be there.
And I think there's interesting ways where, especially in the indie space, people are working on ways of disrupting that model, right? Like you have the way Andy Weir wrote The Martian, where he's just like, I'm just going to put up a chapter on my blog. And then eventually when he brought it to Amazon, he was like, I'll do 99 cents because it's the lowest price they'll let me do. And I can't do free automatically. And it kind of blew up. But it blew up because he wrote the book with a growing audience of people. So, and there's just different ways, like Kickstarter, just different scenarios or things that are becoming more prevalent. But at the end of the day, like I'm personally a really, really big advocate for if this is something that you are deciding that you want to do, you have to write because you can't help it at the and then you figure out how to make room for it in your life. Because I can guarantee you're going to have bad days. Like the bad days are going to come. You're going to have days where it feels, I mean, I can count on like at least 2 or 3 full-on panic attacks, like severe days of just like, what am I doing? Like my family's sacrificing so that I have room to do this, and I don't have anything to show for it, and I'm on a deadline and all this other stuff, right? So like I don't think it's ever easy, even when you have days that are great. And if the ultimate reason that you are doing it is because there are easier careers. I mean, it's a great career, but there are easier ones. And if that's all it is sort of like a means to an end, then I just don't think that fuel is enough, to push you through some things. I think you have to do it because you kind of can't help it. And then you work at figuring out a way to make it work in your life practically.
I agree wholeheartedly. And I think one of the best pieces of advice that a past mentor of mine ever gave me was I was struggling, like finishing a certain project and working on a certain project. And he was like, Keelan, you have to want it. And I was like, well, I do want it. And he's like, no, 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 you have to want it. And I was like,
Okay.
I get it. Like,
Yeah.
but yeah, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly that it's kind of something you have to, if it's something you need to do and it's like
Mm-hmm.
in you will find the place. But it is hard. And like you said, you mentioned like sacrifices that you and your family have had to make. Like that is whether it be time, energy, money in some
Mm-hmm.
cases, like
All of
it's
the above.
100% all of the
Yeah.
above. Yeah, me too. All of the above, probably and
Yep.
more. Yeah, for
Yep.
sure. Um, anyway, just a really, really interesting discussion on how like writing is so unique as a career. I want to dive back into kind of the time you spent at Oxford because you were not like your undergrad was not in writing. So, in your opinion, I guess what's your opinion around people pursuing an academic background
Mm.
in writing? Is it something that authors need? If not, if it's just kind of like a great experience that maybe people should pursue, like who would you recommend
Hmm.
this kind of program to?
Sure. That's a great question. So I think I kind of view it from two angles, right? One thing I will say, and again, this is just my opinion. You can disagree with me, but I don't really believe in talent as a signifier, as a distinguisher. Like
Interesting.
I
Okay.
don't believe in the idea that now I do think that temperament is a thing. I think
Mm-hmm.
but I think that for every amazingly talented person that you see excelling in a field, there's 10 who had the potential to be that talented who didn't put in the work
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to get there. So it's confirmation bias. We don't know about them because they didn't do the work
Yep.
to develop their skill set and get where they needed to be for us to know their names. And so we only see and it's easy to go, oh, great authors are just naturally talented. I don't buy it because writing is a discipline, it's a skill set, just like anything else. And so on the one hand, I don't really think. Oh man, I'm trying to be a little careful here. I don't.
Yeah, just it's
I
fine.
don't think here. Let
Go
me say.
for it.
I don't think that any author could actually live up to anywhere close to their full potential purely on their own. Just as a like, I'm gonna sit down at
Definitely.
the keyboard and bang out a story, and then there. Now I'm also a huge advocate for learning through doing,
Mm-hmm.
and learning through like, yeah, you write a crappy story and then you hire a great editor. You're gonna learn a lot if you
Oh
take it on
gosh, so
seriously and
much.
actually, work it. Like if you can work at improving your writing craft and your voice in one way with every project you finish, then you're fine, right? You'll get where you need to go eventually. Now, with that said, I think there's a lot of like why would you slam around and like go in the dark when you can get a flashlight? There are flashlights. Like other author like especially like it's weird how generous many authors are, and a lot of like very 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 talented, very skilled, very successful authors have written amazing books. So like is an I think that an academic approach to writing is really stilted and often fairly ineffective because and here's partly why. Most of my experience, even at Oxford, a lot of my experience of academic writing focused on the mechanic of beautiful writing or quality writing or I'll just impressive writing, like writing to impress, right? But the problem is that the 80 something 90 something percent of readers don't care. They
Yeah.
don't want to be impressed, they want to be engaged. And I don't like to even use the word like entertained, sounds like such a cheap word. It's more than that. We read stories to be connected to other people, to be connected to like life outside of ourselves, to be cathartically engaged in a story. And that you can have the most beautiful prose in the world and fail miserably at that. I mean, we've all read books where it's like it's like window dressing. It's pretty, but what's happening here?
Yep.
So I think that mechanics of what I think of as like storycraft or narrative craft, I have not really encountered that being taught in a lot of classrooms.
Mm-hmm.
So if it were me and I was gonna go back and like I mean, I'm partly speaking out of two sides of my mouth because I loved my time at Oxford. I think it was an amazing program, but it's extremely unique. And I have not seen a lot of other programs that are structured the way that it is. And it was a graduate program, not an undergraduate
Right.
program.
Yes. Which does make, I mean,
it makes a big difference.
It makes a big difference. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think your money and your time would be way better spent. Like, get a masterclass subscription and go through the entire course 3 times from like Neil Gaiman and oh my gosh, Handmaid's Tale. Margaret Atwood is amazing. Hers is amazing. Like Helen Mirren's is amazing. James Patterson's is actually weirdly good. Like even though it can be a little bit of it, but like his masterclass is really good. Go watch all of those. It's $100 for the year. Like that's way cheaper than school.
Yep.
Other books I love. Donald Moss writing the breakout novel. That was the book that I read when I was flailing around, that grabbed me by the throat and said, you have no idea what you're doing, but some other people do have an idea what they're doing, and you can learn it. Like you can learn how to tell a good story on purpose and not just like accidentally luck your way into it one time. So that was writing the breakout novel is amazing. Sean Coyne's Story Grid and Stephen Pressfield's blog in general are fantastic resources for really just getting your head around. Oh, and everything by James Scott Bell. Everything by James, like everything that he has written is just glorious on narrative structure. Not outlining per se, but like understanding the skeletal framework underneath your plot. What are the emotional movements by which a character begins flawed and goes through some kind of a process, which is what we all care about, by the end of which they have like wrestled with a theme of like cosmic significance in some way and come out changed on the other side. Like how do you do that over and over again on purpose? So frankly, like I would start there. Like there's so much, I mean, I've just skimmed the surface. There's so much good stuff. Start there and like, but here's the challenge, right? That takes a high degree of self-discipline because it's like you can say you're going to do that, but that means you actually have to have the time. The benefit of an academic program is going to make you do it because you've already paid the money and you've got terms and grades and deadlines and all that other stuff looming over you. So you're going to show up and you're going to write a lot. Ideally, if it's a halfway decent program, you're actually going to write. You're not just going to sit around and talk about James Joyce all day, but you'll write and like, so it'll be good. So there's part of me that wants to be like, look, if nothing else, do that because it will help. It just feels like a really expensive half measure that's going to still leave a lot of gaps that you have to go fill in later.
Right.
There's
like,
so many. If you can, hunker down and do it. You know, get your own resources for like a couple $100. It's not even that, like compared to college tuition, like peanuts, a few $100s, and then time and attention. But like set aside 20 minutes every evening when you get home from work or whatever, like find a window. It doesn't have to be amazing. And I personally think that kind of time and energy would be better spent than committing to a full-on academic program, especially if you're using I don't have a degree, I didn't go get an MFA or whatever, as the reason why you're not actually doing it. Like, that's not really, I think it's really easy for that to turn into, I haven't done that, and I can't do that, so I can't do this, and a little bit of like an excuse. That you don't. No. Does someone need to have a degree to write? Of course not. But does someone need to study the craft of writing in order to improve to the point where they can consistently produce quality work? Yes. You're not going to luck into that just because you have really cool ideas.
I love how you use the terms consistently. And one of the things that you said a few times in there that I really enjoyed was on purpose, because I think I think many people out there, myself included, are very capable of, we consume stories on a daily basis, whether it be through writing or like through books or TV or movies, whatever it may be. And like, I feel like instinctually the kind of good storytelling has been ingrained in everyone where we can stumble upon it by accident fairly easily. But to consistently do it on purpose, like you're saying, is something
which is the only way to build a career.
Exactly.
It is.
Yeah.
So
no,
such
an interesting perspective.
And especially because one of the things that I see often, and I kind of like, I never quite know how to answer this.
Hmm.
Is like, I'm in a lot of like reader groups and author support groups on Facebook, social media, just because it's my world. Like the indie author world is, I love it, and it's where I have a lot of my good friends and I've made great relationships. And one of the things that I see very often is younger writers, and I just mean younger in the sense of like not having gone very far early in their journey, will post something like, I have an idea, and they'll lay out their idea, like a story about a so and so who does a this. Do you think this is a good story? Like, could this work? And I always want to be like, you're asking so the wrong question. Like, of course it can, or maybe it won't be. Like, concept means almost nothing. Execution is everything. I mean, Gift of the
Right.
Magi is a story about people buying Christmas presents for each other. Like, but it's one of the greatest short stories ever written because it was executed well. And at the end of the day, like, originality is overrated to a degree, just because like ideas have been done. We've been doing stories for a really long time, and there's not a whole lot of like genuinely new ground to tread, and yet
Hmm.
every story is new. And it's the way that you take an idea and you wrap it in your unique expression, your voice, your perspective, your history. You literally, it comes out of you as a person. And then it's that. And so your capacity through the skill that you develop, and which is what I think of as craft, is like the tool set, right? Is like, do you have your chisel, your planer, your hammer, your saw? Like, do you have the pieces, and do you know how to use them so that you can convert your concept into reality in a way that actually allows it to have the impact that it's meant to have?
Yeah.
Um, but I see people ask that all the time, like, oh, here's this cool idea. Do you think it can work? And some people are like, no, that's not a very good idea. And other people are like, yeah, that's a cool idea. And my answer is always like, I don't know, write it. I can't tell you because I don't know. Like, the concept doesn't mean anything until it's an actual story.
100%. And I was just talking with someone the other day, or they were on a live stream. I can't remember where this came up, but they said like, they were like, I'm convinced that you could give 100 authors the same writing prompt and nobody's
Totally.
going to come up with
Totally.
a similar
No
like
question.
product. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I completely agree. That's a really interesting perspective, though. I haven't heard it laid out like that before because I also do see all of those posts. Um, I've never really thought too much about them because
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I am fairly new to writing. Don't get me wrong, but at the same time, I was like, I don't think I would ever do
Right.
that. So I
Well,
like,
right. It's like my story ideas kind of grab me by the throat, and then I'm obsessed with them.
yeah,
I don't
same.
really care about someone's opinion. It's terrible to say. I'm not really interested in people's opinion. I'm either obsessed with them or I'm not. And then it's my job to make them something that other people will feel the same way that I do about them.
Agreed, agreed. I feel like that's how I approach stories too. Like when I get a story idea, it normally comes fairly like fully formed, not like all the beats and plots and
Right.
whatever, but like the concept comes
Yeah.
fairly fully formed, and then I'm like, all right, this is what we're doing.
Yeah, we're gonna
So
do it. Especially
yeah.
because most of my story ideas, if I tried to give you like, here's a 2 sentence, it'd be like, that's so like what? That doesn't even. I don't even know how to wrap
Mm,
my head. I'm like, no, 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 it's a thing. Trust me, it's gonna work. It's gonna work. Like,
yeah, you're
it's
like,
gonna
don't
be
worry, I
fine.
got this. I got this.
It's a cool
Um,
idea.
Yeah, no, but that's really interesting. Yeah, I've never really because I see those posts frequently, and I've not really thought much about them. So it's interesting to hear that perspective. We do have about 20 minutes left. I just want to say to anybody who might be watching right now, if you do have any questions, please leave them in the chat, and we will get to the end. But Justin, I was curious, like, we've talked about all the kind of academic backgrounds. So I was curious, like, what has been the most valuable lesson you've learned from your academic writing career? And then what has been the most valuable lesson you've learned outside of your academic
Mm.
writing career?
Oh man, that's a great question. So I think if I was to think back to, I'll just think about Oxford specifically. Um, I think the biggest thing that I took away in terms of like if you were going to read my writing before I went in, and then read my writing after I came out, was getting a better instinctive sense of pace,
Mm-hmm.
pace and space. So when I'm a very like high concept writer a lot of the time, and especially when I was just starting out for years and years and years, like I worked on the same book for 15 years and never, because I started over. I mean, and good, like it's a good thing that I did, because I was learning. It was my like trial and error window, and every time I would hit a new kind of threshold, and then I would find some new resources, and then everything I learned would make me realize that it would just be easier to start over and reconfigure a bunch of things and whatever. So okay. But a lot of that was also my lack of confidence, hiding behind the need to have a perfect outline.
Right.
And like to know, like, you can't go into writing a story knowing that it's going to be great when you like when you're until you're done. Like, do you know what I mean? Like the
Oh
pressure
gosh,
of having to make it,
I know exactly what you mean. I recently
it
wrote
kills you.
a sci-fi thriller and I was like, the concept of this book I am so passionate about, but
Mm-hmm.
I wrote the whole thing and I was like, wow, that
Yeah.
fell flat. And I think it's
But you've got
because
to do that, you know?
you've got to
Like
do that.
you
And
have to.
I'm still in love with the concept, but I'm like, this is something that is not a now project. This is
Yeah.
maybe a five
That's a
years
great
from
way to
now
say it.
project.
I'll circle
Yeah.
back around maybe. And that's sort of so like so I definitely like I came into to that to the master's program I think really still already like fairly good by then of sort of like building a scaffold.
Right.
But it was very my writing was I would say kind of lifeless. Like it was well executed and the ideas were cool, but I didn't know how to bring that spark into it. Like to bring it's so hard to define. But a lot of my work in poetry and then in screenwriting was really, really helpful. Like the structure and the beats, and like screenwriting forces you, especially stage writing specifically. The whole point is that you are writing with no tags of any kind.
Yep.
It's dialogue. Like our instructors were very like classical Shakespearean thespian. Like so, it's like you have no like everything you have is dialogue. That's all you can write. It's you are going to write a play in dialogue just like Shakespeare did. And if he could do it, so can you. And so some of those elements I think were really, really helpful. And just kind of like everything I wrote for such a long time, it was like it was compressed. And like what was there was good, but there was no breathing room and things were too fast. I didn't have enough setting description. I didn't have really good character moments or like I knew them and it was like I would nod at them or imply them, but they never actually happened on the page very well.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really, really helpful. And I think by the time I finished, I wrote basically the first half of the book that I eventually published as my final like 2 year project, and that was the first time I'd written a long form. It was like maybe 50,000 words, and that was the first time I'd written a long format of something that I actually felt good about. I mean, it was
Right.
still like reading it now, I'm sure I'd be like, oh Lord, but I felt good about it because that takeaway was what turned it into an actual breathing story instead of just
Mm-hmm.
like a conceptual exercise, if that makes sense. Um, so that from school, I think honestly, like it may be a slightly weird answer, but the biggest thing that I have learned since school is how to make sure that I'm always having fun when I'm writing. Um,
Oh, that's so
and
nice. Yeah.
what I mean by that is it's so easy to be in such a tense headspace
Yep.
because especially if you're thinking about like someone's gonna read this and they're gonna hate it and then like what if it sucks or what if or and or even like almost get, like especially if you have a deadline or whatever, like the mechanics of getting the story out can become rote.
Mm-hmm.
um and so I've just learned since then that like because if I'm ever sitting at the keyboard writing a story and I'm not having fun, then why would I assume that anyone who's reading what I'm writing is going to have fun, like is going to and you know what, like I'm using fun as a bit of a shorthand, but like I think of it as when I'm at my keyboard, I try to always have that mindset of like it's like being a concert pianist. Like you watch their or ballet dancer, like any artist who's worked hard on their craft and then hard enough that it can recede into the background and you're not thinking about the mechanics of what you're doing anymore. You're
Right.
just expressing something. And you know what I write because I love it and it's super fun. And when I get in that headspace where it's like I'm just gonna let my characters do stuff and I'm gonna like I have my plan, but if I'm not being delighted or like if I'm not giving myself chills or if I'm not making myself laugh or if I'm not feeling like I'm on the verge of tears at moment, like then what am I doing? Like what? Then it's just this like dry structure of a thing, and that was how I approached writing for a really, really, really long time. And I think over time since then, I think I mean, I'm still, yeah, I still have to remind myself of it, but it's like, Justin, have fun. Like, come on, just relax, like relax and have some fun. And just get back to, and that has actually helped my productivity go up massively. I think
Mm-hmm.
the quality of my drafts has gone up massively. So, and that's just something I've had to keep practicing that muscle and that posture to be able to get to that point. So
I really
probably since then.
Yeah, no, I really like that perspective because I definitely know that myself, like at least with the book that I'm currently writing, man, the pressure feels on.
Mm-hmm.
And like sometimes I sit down to
Once you get
write and
books
it's
out,
just
it
like,
gets worse because
oh,
then like people liked one thing, so then this is going to be the book that finally proves that I'm a fraud, and they're going to hate it, and you know,
yeah.
like,
I'm working on a sequel and it's like, oh my God,
oh
like
man,
people liked the first one and now what if they
mm-hmm.
don't like the
Now
second? So
what?
every
Yeah.
time I sit down, I'm like, oh gosh, like I want this one to be better than the first one. What if it's
Yep.
not? Like what even if it's still all right, because people enjoyed the first one. So even if it's still good, but what if it's
Mm-hmm.
not better? Like
Right.
when
No,
you
I
just
get
sit
you.
there and
And
it
you know what? I'm like halfway through book 6 in my series right now,
yeah,
and that never fully goes away. Or maybe it will when you're doing your book 30 or something, but at least by now, I've just that has been my antidote to that. Is to just say, you know what? The one thing I know
time
for
for fun.
sure is that someone out there is going to read this and hate it.
Yeah.
I know that because my goal is to write something that's distinctive enough that people can react to it. I mean, who likes oatmeal with no seasoning? Like you have to make in order to create something that somebody loves, you have to also make something that someone will hate. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
no middle ground there. So just like someone's going to hate it. It's fine. Other people are going to love it. And like if I can the more I can just relax and get back to like why am I doing this? I'm doing this because I love it and it's a privilege and I am grateful for the space that I am afforded in my life to do this. I love telling these stories and I just like connecting with people this way. So let me just get back to having fun and just like I think of it as like like jazz. Like you watch jazz musicians just riffing and they're obviously having so much fun and
Yep.
they're great at what they do, but they're having fun mostly. And then it's like the quality is a byproduct. And it's what in for me it's what injects that heart into things that elevates it and kind of breathes life into it and makes it more than just a formula of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um so yeah, I mean that's been my biggest. I've just kind of continually worked my way into figuring out how to, partly as like a sanity mechanism because other I like especially early on like the first couple of years when it's like no I'm really gonna do this. Okay, book 1 is out. Oh crap, book 2 is oh my god I
Yeah.
gotta do another one and like I have to we're this far down the line like I have to make this great. I just honestly I started driving myself crazy and like I said like I actually got to the point where I was starting to have like panic attacks sitting down to work on a book and then it was like, man, something's wrong with this. Like, this is not
Yep.
a healthy headspace. This isn't like a productive headspace. What good is going to come out of this? So that's just been a learning curve for me over the past like 2 years, especially as I've been really working on the Far Shore Chronicles more consistently and releasing more of those. Just kind of getting into a routine of like, it's going to be okay. And you know what? Maybe I'll write about the next one. Like maybe book 6 will be the one that everyone's like, oh well, there you dropped the ball. Okay, I'm still a writer. Like
Yep.
I'll take a deep breath, I'll pivot and I'll keep writing because that's what I do, you know. This doesn't have to define my identity, and if I can get back to that space, then I can actually relax and enjoy creating a story again, you know.
I love that. You're literally speaking to my soul right now. Thank you.
Good.
This is the
I'm
pep talk
glad.
that I needed.
Go forth and
Um,
conquer.
I also think, I think also being in the indie space, you know, there's an advantage to that when it comes to kind of this pressure, I suppose, because it's
Mm-hmm.
in the big five traditional publishing or in the big publishing, like
Mm-hmm.
one bad sales
Yep.
thing, one bad sales of a book
Yep.
or one bad reception,
You're done. You're
yeah,
not gonna get
yeah,
another one very easily.
yeah, not very
Yeah.
easily, no.
You can just,
Unless you've
as an
had
indie, you can
major,
just cap
yeah,
off a series, like kill all the characters and start a new one, and okay. Even like, I
exactly,
mean, like, hey, make a pen
exactly.
name if you have to like take everything that you've learned from failing a few things or whatever you've learned and start a pen name and start over again. Fine. And also, I think it's really significant too that for an indie author, like for me, I am not thinking about writing to an editor or an acquisitions editor especially, right? I'm writing to readers and I'm fortunate
Yep.
enough, I mean like I have a long way to go. But I am fortunate enough by now to have actually met people who didn't know me before, like not my mom and not my friends, like just people who found my books and really love them. And they're like in my Facebook fan group now. And they're excited to know that another book is coming out. And like, I'm actually friends with some of them now. That's been super cool. But like, just knowing that like not, this sounds bad, real people, but like people without an agenda or without any like loyalty to me as a person like my stories. And so like, well, at the very least, they're gonna like the next one. And you know, there's gonna be those people who leave you the 1-star reviews because, you know, your heroine's hair was too short or some ridiculousness. But that's fine because some people are gonna really love this. And that's kind of become an increasing motivator to me to like to go through the process over and over again and be like, okay, time to, you know, take a deep breath and dive back in and do the next one.
Definitely. Readers are so motivating. And I like how you kind of have framed that like you're not writing for an editor, you're writing
Yeah.
directly for the readers. And like that is something that I feel deeply as an indie author, especially with the second book coming out. Like I'm writing this for the people
Mm-hmm.
who loved the first book.
Yes,
Like,
exactly.
and that brings me so much joy. Also, that's also where the pressure comes from. But I'm
Yes,
going to start taking your
both.
approach.
It is both.
So I guess I want to dive into like any suggestions for how newbie writers can go about improving their craft. Like you mentioned
Mm-hmm.
a whole bunch of resources earlier with the masterclass and all of that. But is there anything like in particular that you would suggest?
So,
Any particular tools you use, maybe?
tools wise, I think that there's, man, again, oh man, I'm feeling like I don't want to make someone feel bad. I think there's a tendency, and okay, I'll speak for myself. As a younger writer, I was always like, oh, what I really need is a better system. I need a better writing program, or
What I
need a
really
better.
need is Scrivener or Grammarly.
Well, and then I got Scrivener,
yeah.
and it was amazing. I love Scrivener. I do all my writing in Scrivener. It's a great asset, but a tool is only going to help you do what you already do better.
Right.
It's not going to
solve any of your
anything.
problems. Yeah,
so,
yeah.
And it can be, there's almost like, so here's, if you, my most like straightforward answer to your question is to not, don't allow yourself to become distracted by chasing down any, like, oh, I've got to be on social media, or, oh, I've got to like learn it because I got to learn a new program. I got to do this. I got to do that. No, you don't. You have to finish stories. That's it. Like, finish stories. If I was going to go back and give myself advice, it'd be like, listen, dummy, like, instead of 15 years to finish your first book, just write it in 7 and start another one, because it's really easy to get caught in that refining loop. And when you haven't finished anything publicly yet, it feels like you have to make your first thing the thing that's going to prove to everyone that you're legitimate. And you don't. Like, you really, really don't. And you shouldn't expect it to. I mean, I always rolled my eyes when I read people be like, oh, your first book will be not your best book, and like, just get it out and whatever. And like, no, my first book is going to be the best book in the universe, and everyone's going to think I'm the best. And of course that wasn't true. So the writing process goes from conceptualization to organization to execution to production. And until you finish that curve, you haven't really experienced everything yet. So finish something and then go back to the beginning of, now I need to come up with a new story. And I need to, and maybe even if it's the second story in a series where some of the characters are set, but now you have to reimagine that whole loop. What's going to be the emotional arc of this new story? Like, there's always something new to learn, and you learn exponentially more from starting, executing, and completing a project than you do from refining a project. I don't think you learn very much from refining anything. That's just what you do to try to make it as good as it can be. You learn from taking what you learned from what you just did and applying it to the next thing that you do. So my biggest piece of advice would be, start before you're ready, finish as fast as you can. Not as fast as you can, like, in the sense of rushing it, but like, push yourself to the end, acknowledging that means that what you do will not be perfect. Get it done. Just get it done. Write 100 words every day. Write 5 words every day. Right? Whatever you can, whatever your capacity is now, start there and then try to add on it next month. Because it's so easy to be like, I mean, I spent years and years being like, well, I can't write at all because I can't really write the way that I want to, which is I want to go in my cave and, have an awesome drink and be like, oh, in my smoking jacket for 10 hours a day and like,
with my old typewriter.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's just not real for, anybody that I know. So saying like, well, I'll write when my life looks like that means what you're really saying is you're never going to do it, because the only way to get, I mean, not if get there, I don't know if that's actually your goal, but you get what I mean. Like, start with whatever your capacity is now.
Yep.
The best thing I ever did was just come to terms, and I did a really hard look at my schedule with work and family and everything else, and I figured that like the one thing I knew for sure is that I could definitely write for 20 minutes every day. Even on my worst day, even when I was the most exhausted, even when I had the most packed schedule, the only excuse that I would have to not write for 20 minutes was that I just gave up. So that became my target. I'm going to write for 20 minutes every day, and I'm not going to be hard on myself for not writing more than that. I'm just going to do that. And that created the foundation that I needed to start actually then building up. And I, a lot of times it would be like, I'm staring at a screen, and I wrote like 18 words in 20 minutes. Like, it was really pathetic. But I showed up and I did it.
Right.
And then it was like that commitment to say like, no, this is my thing. I'm going to do it. Put my head, like, I am going to pay whatever price I have to pay and show up for my thing. So I'm going to do it, and then finish something. Let yourself get to the end. Push through the absolute gut-wrenching terror of putting what you finished out in front of some other people. Even if you don't fully publish it, let other people
share
read
it.
You have to. Yeah. You just have to eventually. And okay, so maybe if you really hate what you just wrote and you just say like, that's for the trash bin, okay, fine. Then start the next one, finish that, and then let people read that. You've got to let people start reading your stuff and finishing it and starting the next thing. And the sooner you can just commit to that loop, the faster you're going to get where you want to go, and the faster you're going to grow as a writer. And it's just really easy to stay stuck in the loop of trying to improve before you do that, so that when you finally put something out, it's like the best thing ever in the world. And I'm just, from my own experience of having tried to do that, I feel like that is a really inefficient approach that takes way longer than it needs to.
I love that so much. And I find like that is my experience now. And had I known, because I think I spent on the book that I published, I spent probably like the idea came to me in 2015. It was published in 2019. So 4 years on it. Mm-hmm. But I really didn't have to. The bulk of that work was done in a short period of time. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, I don't even know what I was doing for like the first 3 years of that. Yeah.
I mean, it's completely understandable. Again, I'm saying like, this is what I did. Don't do what I did.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not picking on anybody. I get it. It's just, if you want to grow fast, the growth is in carrying what you learned from the project you just finished into the project you then start. And so the sooner you can start doing that, the faster you're going to grow. And the sooner you'll have a body of work.
Think that's amazing advice, and I'm just like, this has been very motivating. I cannot wait to like go work on all my stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
I like cannot wait. And I love the 20 minutes, like the 20 minute suggestion that you gave. It's actually, I heard a piece of advice a long time ago that was about, it was kind of similar, but about going to the gym. And they were like, just commit, like however many days you want to go to the gym, whether it be 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, just commit to putting your workout gear on and driving yourself there and walking in.
Yeah.
Like, because once you're there, you'll do it. Stuff. Yeah.
Totally. And there were lots of days where it was like, oh, I can't do this, but I said 20 minutes, and then 20 minutes turned into 45 or an hour, and I got some actual work done, and it wasn't actually as bad as I thought. And that's frankly like it's a little bit like the mental and emotional capacity that you have to develop. I've talked to people a lot about. It's a little bit like saying you want to become a marathoner, right? Mm-hmm. And I saw like all these people like, oh, I'm gonna write, and like, great, like start with half of a 5K. Like start walking, just walk, just get out and walk every day. Please don't like try to go run, however many miles, because other people make it look easy. And then feel super discouraged because you can't do it the next day because you're exhausted, and then you give up and you're like, oh, I can't do it. You have to build capacity. Like, it's weird. You were talking about this before a little bit, but like, it's just strange to me how in our culture we don't consider mental and emotional energy to be the same thing as physical energy. It's like somehow because it's intangible, it must be infinite, but it isn't. Like, you're expending a resource. It's the same as if you went as an athlete. No one would expect an athlete to do things beyond capacity. It's like you push and then you rest, and you push and then you rest. And someone who hasn't already developed those muscles, you don't expect them to be able to just run out on a field and perform. But somehow, because it's like something in our minds or in our souls, it's like, oh yeah, just wing it, you'll be fine. Just write a lot. It's not that hard. No, it's literally the exact. It's as hard, if not harder. And so you have to build up to it. You have to build the capacity. And once you do, like, then you go out and you run 5 miles, and it doesn't feel like anything, because you can run 10 if you really need to. But so 5 is no big deal. But 2 years before it would have killed you. So you have to give yourself grace as you build the capacity to do the thing that you're learning to do. It's not just about knowledge level stuff. So.
No, I think that's amazing. And yeah, it's so true that we don't treat like the energy, the mental energy it takes to do something the same as like the physical energy to do something, which like is a little bit silly to me, because we have weekends exactly for that reason, to take a break, to take a mental break from work so that you could come back refreshed.
Well, and neuroscientists will tell you this is a super real thing. It's just somehow we like to act like it isn't. A lot of the time. I don't know. It's a weird cultural hangover that I hopefully will get over someday. But at the moment, this is the world we live in.
No, but it's true. And it's like chemical that, like, there's cortisol exhaustion that can happen in your brain from producing too much cortisol, which is like the stress hormone. And like it can cause, it's totally a real thing. I'm just looking at the time now, and so we are at the hour. So I'm going to skip a few questions, but I have one last question for you.
Sure.
And so it's, if you could go back to the moment before you hit publish on your first book, or the moment before your first book was published. So it's been written, but the moment before you published, and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be and why?
I think the first thing that comes to my mind has less to do with the writing itself, because hopefully by the time you're ready to publish, you've done everything that you can do. And knowing that it's not going to be perfect, and no matter what, like, it's not going to be, there's still going to be some typos in there. Yes, in 5 years, you should look back and say, oh man, I could have done this, that, and the other thing better. Because if you're not, then like you haven't grown at all. Of course, it's not going to, but the most that you can do. I think what I would say before I rushed to publish because it was a marker for me. And I'm not even like sorry that I did it to a degree, but from the publishing standpoint, I would say, like, okay, so you have something ready, don't publish it would be my first piece of advice. Like, write the next thing. And then as you're writing the next thing, then begin the process of cultivating an audience, connecting with. There's lots of ways that you could, like, write a great blog, or maybe start doing an awesome newsletter, or do what you're doing, like make a kick-ass YouTube channel, or like start connecting with people and find ways to get your work in. Like, if I want to boil it down to, like, you want to be super super specific, get commitments from like 40 or 50 people that you give your book to read. Get a commitment for a review, and if you want to be super locked down about it, like, have them actually send you the text of their review, so that you're ready to go day one or in the first week, and have, like, do the pre-work to help, because you put so much work into writing the thing. No one's going to find it if you just throw it up. There's a whole other conversation we could have about, like, doing through the learning curve of, like, managing ad platforms and building newsletter, all the publishing stuff. And on this flip side, I'm not saying, like, don't overtax yourself. Like, that's a thing that there's some of that you can only do once you start publishing, because you have to have books out, right? But, like, especially for me, like for the Far Shore Chronicles, I really do. There's a part of me that wishes I had not released the first one when I did. And then I had just, like, I had the 2 and 3 planned out, but there's always something there's things you discover as you write. And there's definitely things I would do differently about the first book to just make it that little bit, that if I had just waited and I'd written like 2 or 3 in the series, just things about the way the characters' personalities evolved. And like, if you go and read the books, you'll probably see it, of like, oh, like
this person changed a little bit. Yeah.
Continuity issues of just like, oh, like that character's a bit different in book 1 than they are by book 3, or little cool, like just things, right? And nothing crushing, but things. that I definitely like. I think the series as a whole would have been a little stronger if I had written more of it. And then my release window schedule could have been a lot better if I had a couple of books ready to go and I had done some groundwork laying and like learn the ropes, like reach out, tell people, like join author reader fan groups, make friends, talk about, if most authors that I know love to read, talk about the
Mm-hmm.
books you love, like make relationships and connections, because those, like, the thing that really turned a corner for me was just making friends with other indie authors, and a lot of them were just super generous and had lists, and were like, and I was like, hey, I've got this book coming out, and they were like, yeah, I'll put it in my newsletter, because we'd become friends through other, other avenues.
Yeah.
um so I mean, don't wait longer than you should, but probably wait longer than you think you want to. If you're really serious about building it like an author career, especially as an indie, um, do the groundwork to start the process of the learning curve of what it takes to publish successfully. Do a little. I mean, there's some great books and great courses out there on understanding how ads work. You can do really well with like $100 and a basic understanding of Facebook ads or Amazon
Mm-hmm.
ads. And there's like $10 books out there that are going to tell you like 90% of what you need to know, but it's a learning curve. So, go through that learning curve a little bit before you throw your, because once you've gone through that first 30-day window of your release, like that's like your release window. And it's not that you can't, still sell the book after that, but it's harder. So that would be my thing. When you're getting ready to get rolling, you've got that first book going. If I could go back, I'd be like, hold up, bud, just okay. I'm super glad you're excited. Like, pop a champagne or whatever you need to do to celebrate. But like, don't let publication be the thing that caps off your writing process and makes it feel like it was all worthwhile. Because I had a big like confidence crash after I released my book and it didn't sell, because of course it didn't sell. Like, why would it sell? No one knew it was there. I wasn't publishing it really. I just put it up. But it hit me hard of like, ooh, you know, that
Mm-hmm.
sucked. It was a bit, and I had to like recover from that about like, oh, I really thought people were going to like the book. And they did. The people who read it liked it, but not very many people read it because they didn't know it existed. So going through
That
that learning curve, at least initially starting to think about like, make up a launch plan, make a marketing plan, even if those sound like scary words to you, there are great resources out there to help you think about how to do that, and you should think about how to do that before you start putting books out.
that's so funny that you gave that answer because I was just talking to a friend of mine a couple weeks ago and I was like, I wish I had just sat on this book
Mm-hmm.
and waited to have a couple more fully ready
Yeah.
to go. Like that exact thing I recently
Just,
said to someone and they said the same thing back to me and
yep.
I was like,
I've
yeah.
talked to a lot of friends who are like, "Yep." Well, but the encouraging thing is that I have the benefit of having a lot of indie author friends who are quite successful now, and they have like 3 series out, and they were like, "Oh yeah, I totally did that on my first series." Like, whoops, live and learn,
Live
finished
and
the
learn,
series,
yeah.
and now the series is up. So then when they applied what they learned by getting it out there and getting it done to their next series, then they had a backlist of another series that when readers got the first book in their new series and found it because they did all the right stuff the second time, well, those readers went back and read, their books
The
from the
other
old
series,
series because
yeah.
it was out there, So it's not like it's less about like, oh, to like get the writing, the publication part perfect. It's more just like, don't set yourself up for discouragement of thinking it's going to be one thing. Like, at least in my experience, books don't sell themselves in the sense that like people don't know about them. So just think through, what is your plan for how people are going to find out about your book as you're releasing it, and do the work on that before you push publish. That would be my, just so that you have, like, you worked hard on it and you want people to see it. And so like, don't set yourself up for discouragement that way, would be my piece of advice.
I think that's a wonderful piece of advice. And honestly, like I said, I was just having this
Yeah.
conversation with someone. Justin, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on and chat today. Before we sign off, I want to turn it over to you to, promote anything you want to promote. Anybody who's watching now or anybody who's watching in the future, all of Justin's links are down in the description box below. So make sure you go to his website and Facebook page and all of that. But I'm going to turn it over to you and let you give a little bit of an outro and then we'll sign off.
Sure. So, like I said, my main series is the Far Shore Chronicles. If you search that on Amazon, you will find the series. The starting point would be the box set of the first 3 books in the series you can get for 99 cents. So that's a great intro. 3 books for that is like a bit of a no-brainer. But if you enjoy like action, adventure, fantasy, a little bit in that Princess Bride mold, a little bit of humor, a little bit of romance, swashbuckling magic, great characters, all that kind of thing, I think the series would be right up your alley and you should check it out. Also, come find me on Facebook. If you search the Far Shore Voyagers, that is our fan group of other readers who enjoy the series. And frankly, like, there's just a lot of really fun people, and we goof off and have fun in there doing nerd stuff and just talking about books and movies and different things like that. So if you want to come hang out with a group of fun, nerdy folk like potentially yourself, that would be a great place to do that and come connect with us there as well.
That's amazing, everybody. Links are below. Thank you so much for joining today. Justin, again, a thank you to you. Really appreciate all this conversation. It's like got me so inspired. So I appreciate that. I really appreciate that.
Yeah,
but thanks you
for
so
having
much.
Me on.
No problem. And we'll see everybody next time on the next episode of the IndieVerse. Bye, everybody.
Bye.